I'm going to go through the step-by-step process of what it takes to create this Polaroid photo effect. So this effect gives images that are isolated on their own layers the look of a Polaroid photo using a combination of methods that include layer styles, blending modes, and layer masks. So I'd like to begin the process of showing you how to do that. We're going to start out with using these images here. Okay. And we'll use these images to create separate Polaroid images, and I will use this particular image here as a backdrop. So I've got this image here that we can drop in at the end, and we're going to begin by creating a new document. So I'm going to hit Control N, and keep in mind that the command keys that I'm using are within the Windows environment. If you're on the Mac, replace the Control key with the Command key, and replace the Alt key with the Option key. So I'll start out with going to the drop-down menu up here and just simply selecting the US paper option, which will give us an 8.5 by 11 by a 300 pixel per inch file. The resolution is critical. If you want something printed, this is the resolution that you'd want to be. So I'm going to hit OK, and we now have our new document. So I'll begin the process by combining all of these images into one document. I'm going to first hit Tab to bring up my tools, go to the Move tool, and start out by doing the following. I could do this in one of several ways, and as you know, in Photoshop, there's always multiple ways of accomplishing the same task. So I'm going to show you two ways to do this. One is better than the other for one particular reason, and I'll explain this. I'm going to work with the first method, which is very simply dragging, I'm holding down my cursor and dragging this image up to my tab of the new document I just created, dragging down to the center, holding down my Shift key, and then letting go with my mouse. Holding the Shift key down will mathematically center the new file within that document. So that's the advantage of that. If I go back here to that file that I just dragged over, I'll now close out of that. So the next step is I'd like to avoid going back to that file and closing out of it by doing the following. I'll select my next image. I'm going to hit Control A to select all, Control C to copy, Control W to close out of the document, and then Control V to paste into the document. All right, so it's Control A, Control C, Control W, Control V. I'll do that one more time with this particular photograph. So Control A to select all, Control C to copy, Control W to close out of the document, and Control V to paste. So we've accomplished the same task as the dragging and dropping method, but we've used the shortcuts and have closed out of that document to minimize the amounts of tabs at the top. I'll do that one last time with this image here. Control A, C, W, V. We'll now bring up our layers palette. I've hit F7. I'm going to hide this top flower layer here, and we will look at what we now have. Hide and show layers. So this particular image here is what I'd like to use for my background. I am referring to the background that you see here, or the green tint. Okay, break this out of view here, and we will continue by selecting that layer, and I'll be hitting Control J to duplicate the layer. So with that layer active, I'm hitting Control J. I'll now drag this down to the bottom, and I want to place this right above my background layer. As soon as I see that double line in between the layers, I know that when I let go, it will drop in place. I'll now hide the top layer. I now have this image here visible along with my background. So with this duplicated layer active, I'm going to go to Free Transform because I want to scale this up, and I'm going to hit Control T. I'll then go to my corner bounding box and click and start dragging outward. And as I'm dragging, I'm holding down the Shift key to constrain the proportions, and I'm also holding down the Alt key at the same time to scale out from the center point. So Shift and Alt is held down as I drag. So I'm going to scale this way up. Let's say I wanted to scale this up even further. I can reposition this as we speak, but we still have a bounding box here. I want to scale this up even further, but I cannot get access to the edge of the bounding box or the corner. So the trick there is to hit Control 0, which will fit this in the window, and that fits the bounding box within editing range. Now go back to the corner, click, start dragging, hold down Shift and Alt once again, and to scale this up a little more. The image looks terrible because it's in scaling mode, so I'm going to hit Enter to apply that, and it now crispens up, and I can still reposition as I see fit. We'll leave this as is for now. All right, so now I'm going to create a background color of that green that you showed you. I want to give this a natural feeling, so I'm going to select the background layer, and I'm going to single click on the foreground color to access the color picker. And I've got some predetermined numbers here in my notes, and we are working with RGB, as you should be with any kind of retouching. If it's for print, you will convert this to CMYK at the end. So the numbers for the green that I'd like are the following. I'm going to type in 30 for red, hit Tab. I'm going to type in 184, tab down to the blue channel, and I'm going to type in 91. And that gives us a green that I found to be nice, and I'm going to hit OK. So I've got green as my foreground color. My background layer is active, and I'm going to hit Alt Delete, which is the shortcut for filling with the foreground color. If I hide this top layer, you can see that green layer underneath. So the next step is to select the layer above, or this image that we see here, and I'm going to work with a blending mode. I'm going to go to the drop-down menu of the Layers palette, click on the drop-down menu, and drag down to Luminosity. I found this to be most effective. A little tip here, if you want to scroll through all these to see what the effect you'd like, you can select the first one, and keep in mind that the blending modes react to underlying layers. So I've selected the first one. I'm now going to scroll through each blending mode by hitting the down arrow key. All right, so you can see it changes to multiply, clicking the down arrow key, it's color burn, linear burn, and so on and so forth. So you can scroll through all these simply by hitting the down arrow key. Once you get down to the one that I liked, which is luminosity, it gives it an overall green duotone effect. So this is the one I'm going with. Now what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to lower the opacity of this layer because I want this to be a background. So I'm going to bring this down to about, let's leave it at 25% for now. All right, so we've got our background to work with here. I'll now go to the images that I see up here. We've got some different sizes. What I'd like to do is work with them all so they're about the same size. So I'm going to select this layer here. I'm going to shrink this down a little bit to match the other sizes. I'll show this top layer, and this layer being active, I'm going to hit Control T for the free transform option. I'm going to go to my corner bounding box, click and start dragging in, holding down Shift to constrain and Alt to scale from the center point. So Shift and Alt is held down, I'll scale in, and there we go. We have about the same size, letting go with my keys and hitting Enter. All right, now we have all of the images that are the size that I'd like to work with. I'll select the first image here, the first layer, and here's where the magic happens. Here's where we can apply this Polaroid photo effect. We're going to apply a layer style to this. So I'm going to double click on the layer, and I'm going to select stroke. That instantly applies a stroke to the image on the layer. And you need to get access to the stroke options or the stroke settings by selecting the name. So once you select the name, you have the settings for that particular layer style in place, and you can now assign a stroke to this image. If we increase the size of the stroke or the width, you'll see that it's increasing as we go along here. And what you have showing is a black stroke with a rounded edge. Certainly not Polaroid look that you want. As long as preview is checked, we can see part of it, and that's good enough. First of all, we of course want this to be white. If I click on the color window here, we get access to the color picker, and I'm going to click and drag up to the white area and simply hit OK. Here we go. We now have white. However, we have rounded corners here. We don't want rounded corners. We want the look of a Polaroid image which has squared off corners. You access that effect by looking at the position here. By default, the stroke settings give you the outside. What we want to do is select inside. Now, the only drawback to selecting the inside is this. It will steal away part of your image. So if I uncheck preview, you'll see that anything out here within a 120 pixel radius is being lost. So keep that in mind when bringing in your images. If you have any important elements that you like to be seen that are on the outside, you'll lose it. So with preview checked, we're going to go with the white inside option, and I'm going to lessen the size. I'll bring that down to 100, which looks just fine. Now what we'll do is create a more realistic effect by applying a drop shadow to this. So I'll select the drop shadow option and select the drop shadow name so I can get access to the settings. Here's what I did. I chose an opacity of 50%, and I'm tabbing down. All right, the angle, you can click and drag this to anywhere you want to determine the light source, if you will. Now the distance will show you in effect how far off the surface you want this to appear. The distance that I chose was a distance of 60 pixels. You can increase that accordingly. It depends on how far off the surface you want this to appear. So I thought 60 pixels was fine, and you can certainly experiment with that. It depends on your subject. So the spread I chose was 12, and the size, which effectively determines the blur of the shadow, I got up to about 65 pixels. Okay, so you can see that you can really blur this out if you'd like. All right, so it depends on, it's up to you as the artist. You have to determine what looks right. So we'll hit OK. So we now have another image on top. This is the Japanese garden. Now here's a nice tip for you. We could double click on this and go to the layer styles again, or we could do the quick method. We can access all the settings that we've applied to this particular layer by doing the following. We're going to right click on this layer that the layer style effects is on. I'm going to select copy layer style. Okay, so that layer style is now copied into the clipboard. I'll select my target layer and right click on the layer here and select paste layer style. Bam. See how quick and easy that was? And now we'll do the same thing for the layer above. That information is still existing in the clipboard, so I'll select my new target layer, right click on that, and select paste layer style. That's a beautiful, quick thing. Now it's a matter of repositioning and angling, but before we do, I've got another option for you here. I'm going to zoom in and we'll talk about this particular image here. We're going to create some text on this layer using a technique that I will show you now. I'm going to just simply click here and type in, I don't know, I'll just type in Lily. Lily gets typed out. Lily comes in at being the same color as what the foreground color is. We're going to change that, so I'm going to double click on the text and click on the color box window here and select white. This is just for temporary use here. All right, so we've got some text in here, which we can resize if we'd like, hitting Control T. Actually, that looks fine. Now we're going to use that text layer to create an effect. I'm then going to Control click on the text layer icon to create a selection. So control clicking on a layer puts a selection around all opaque pixels on that layer. And then I'm going to select the layer below and I'm going to hit Control J. What this will do is copy the pixels from this current layer to the layer above. Okay, so I'm going to hit Control J. What happened was this. It copied all of the pixels in this layer to the layer above. However, it also copied the layer effect. So what we want to do is remove that layer style effect by right-clicking and selecting Clear Layer Style. We still have these pixels here to show you what it looks like. So these pixels were copied from this layer here seamlessly to the layer above, which gives us some control over techniques. So now we'll apply our own layer style to this by double clicking. Let me drag this off to the side here so you can see the effect immediately. I'm going to select Bevel and Emboss, and then click on the Bevel and Emboss option and select Outer Bevel. It's a little hard to see right now, but something is happening here. I'll then also apply a stroke to this. I'm going to select the stroke option, and I'm going to make the stroke white to make the text a little more visible. You can start to see this a little better. I can also increase the size of the stroke here if I'd like. What I can also do to pronounce this more or make the text stand out more is to give it a color overlay. If I select the color overlay option, by default it creates a red color overlay. All right, I can change that color by selecting this color overlay option and clicking on the color, and I can change the color to any one of these colors in here. I can actually sample this yellow, for example. I could sample any one of the colors within here while I'm in the color picker, just simply by dragging my mouse over. Man, let me go a little brighter here. And I'll hit OK. Right now it's opaque. We can't see through this. So what we'll do is lower the opacity of that. This way you can see through to the flowers behind this or the imagery behind this, and it's got the effect that you'd like. We'll hit OK. So there we have it. That's the technique for creating this text technique on the images. Now let's say you also wanted to put some specific details in each photograph. Since you have a white border here, you can use the text tool to type in some important information in the white area here. Let's say it's your child. You might want to write down your child's name, when the photo was taken. Let's just arrange these now accordingly. Okay, so we've got our petunia layer. Okay, that's what I'll call that. So what I'm going to do is click and control click on these two layers that have the text and the Polaroid image, and I'm going to link them together by right-clicking and selecting link layers right here. All right, so now they're linked together. That means if we select one layer and go to move it, the link layer will move along with it. So that gives us the opportunity to go to the free transform option and rotate them both together. And once I have my rotation and I'm happy with that, I'll hit enter. I'll then go to my top layer. By control clicking, it'll tell me where that layer is. And I will control click the text layer above that and right click and link those layers together. And now I will free transform that to scale that, free transform that to rotate and position. Let's just bring this out here for now. And then I will control click on the central layer here and I'll just rotate that accordingly and reposition that. I'll work with something like that. So we have an assortment of options here that you can work with. I can use that technique for creating the text background that you saw in this image here, which is called gardens. However, there's an extra step you have to go through with that, and I'll describe that now. I'll drag down and make sure that my background layer is active right here. All right, so that's the image that we have set to luminosity, blending mode, and 25% opacity. I'm going to go to my text tool, click on my document. That instantly creates a text layer above my background document. I'm going to type in the word gardens. I'm going to make that 72 points, which it is already. Put that in position where I'd like it to be. I will control click on the text layer to make that a selection. Hide the text layer. Go to my background layer and hit Control J, and then I will do the following. I will create a layer style out of this text by double clicking and selecting Bevel and Emboss, and selecting the Bevel and Emboss option and selecting Outer Bevel this time. I'll also apply a stroke to this because it's a little difficult to see, and I will make the stroke white. And I will increase the size of the stroke just slightly. And I'm also going to apply a color overlay. Right now, by default, it comes in as being red. Now, notice that the effect of this is not as emphatic as it was in the other text, only because when we Control J this text to the layer above, it also duplicated or copied the 20% opacity of that layer and also the blending mode of luminosity. We can adjust that. I'm going to click and create a new color. Let me just get a brighter green here and hit OK. And let's hit OK for now. All right, so this is our layer, our new text layer that says gardens. Now, again, note that it duplicated the layer blending mode and also the opacity. So we can increase the opacity, and we can also remove the blending mode, which doesn't make a difference because the opacity in the layer style is 100%. So we can go back into that, and notice the going back and forth process. So in the color overlay, I'm going to decrease the opacity so we can see through. I'll hit OK, and that looks pretty good. All right, so the last step is to create this ruled border, all right, which is quite simple, but it's using layer masks. I also have this flower that I want to bring in. Let's do that now. So I'm going to increase the size of that image there by selecting the layer, hitting Control T, going to the corner bounding box and clicking and scaling out. I'm then going to eliminate the background. I'm going to go to my quick selection tool and just kind of quickly go around this, and this does a pretty good job with selecting the flower. So I'm now going to inverse and hit delete. So that deletes everything outside that selection. I'll deselect and free transform or move. And I think what I will also do is increase the saturation a little bit. I'll go to my use saturation adjustment layer and just increase the saturation a little bit. Now notice what's happening here. It's affecting all of the underlying layers. Okay, so if I've now increased the saturation about 15%. If I X out of this and hide adjustment layer, you can see that it's affected every layer. I only wanted to affect the flower layer. So what I'm going to do is create a clipping mask by holding down the Alt key on my keyboard and holding my cursor in between the adjustment layer and the layer below. You get this funny looking icon, and I'm now Alt clicking. Notice it indented, and it's only affecting the layer below. All right, if I hide that layer, the adjustment layer, you'll see the difference it makes. It gives the flower a little bit more vibrancy. I'm now going to do the last step by creating a new layer and creating a double rule here. So I'm going to go to my rectangular marquee tool. I'm clicking and dragging down and just creating a selection that looks like that. On the new layer, I'm going to stroke this selection. Okay, I'm hitting D for my default foreground and background colors, hitting X to swap them, and then going to edit stroke. So I'm now going to stroke with the foreground color of white. I'll accept 5 pixels, will work with that. That's fine. Doesn't matter if it's center or not. I'm going to hit OK. If I deselect, you'll see that it's now applied a stroke to that. However, I only want a portion of this to be visible. So I'm going to create a layer mask on this layer. Using a layer mask only because I can change my mind later on if I want to. I'm going to click on the layer mask icon. I'll make sure black is my foreground color. So now what I'm going to do is use my gradient tool to work with. This will give a nice even gradation and dissipate this rule evenly. Making sure that it's black to transparent. This will give us more creative freedom in the layer mask here. I'm going to make sure my layer mask is selected, and I'm going to click and drag in here. All right, so I'm starting from the right and dragging in. Notice what's happened here in my layer mask. I've created a gradient within the layer mask, keeping in mind that black will mask out whatever is on that layer. All right, so if I click and drag in, I can mask out a little further. Now, notice what happens here. This is why black to transparent will work on this. If it was black to white, once I click and drag, it will change that previous action. I'll click here and drag upward and let go. This is the effect here. So everything in gradation form that is black here is invisible. And now to make a double rule, I'll very simply duplicate this layer by Control J-ing. So now we have one layer directly on top of the other. If I go to my Move tool, I can drag this new layer and place it wherever I'd like. I can also fine-tune it by using my down arrow key, as long as I'm in the Move tool. So that completes this very long demo. I hope you guys got some value from this. I'll see you soon. Bye.